Hello, everyone, and welcome to this seminar. So this will be the first in a series of seminars that I will be giving. The idea is to give a general presentation on a theme for 30 to 45 minutes, and this first seminar is going to be dedicated to this book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Palmer Hall. It's a really interesting book. It's a occult classic. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to do is to bring spiritual awareness to the American public. And using the framework of a Western American spirituality. Most of these spiritual ideas, they come from the East, from Asia, from Japan, from India, and it gets culturally translated into like an American framework. Now there's also like European spirituality, but there isn't really like an American-based sort of genre of spirituality, right? America doesn't have, well, it kind of does have a unique genre of spirituality, and that's kind of like one of the areas that I'm trying to explore is, well, what's the American genre? Not just, someone going off and studying, Asian mythology and then bringing it to America, but something quite uniquely our own, which is closer to the European tradition. So there's a lot to explore out there. But Manly P. Hall, he's definitely a guy to start with. He grew up in New York. And he's an American mystic, and he's kind of like the poster boy of the occult. Most occult or esoteric authors or artists, these guys are artists. They tend to be weird, strange. But one of the things that what in the occult or esoteric arts, you need to have a skill of telling stories. I think telling stories is vitally important, especially nowadays in our age. We have plenty of like good writers, but there aren't really that many great storytellers, right? And Manly P. Hall was definitely a great storyteller. Like if you listen to his lectures, which there's actually a website dedicated to that. There's a Manly P. Hall archive with like 300 of his lectures. You just find a theme that you find interesting and, just listen to it. And he's a great lecturer. And that's something that I admire from his works is his lecturing style. So that's something that I want to, learn from him is how to tell stories like he did. And how to make them engaging. So in his time, he was a nice little, fairy tale creature telling these stories and fascinating people. So he's definitely a central figure. He's not mainstream. He's not as popular as some of. He's not as popular as some of the more. Contemporary guys, but he is true to the sort of esoteric tradition. So now let's get into the book. So it's The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It contains like 50 essays, 50 chapters on all kinds of world spiritual ideas. And the idea is that this is an encyclopedia, right? Like just look how thick it is. It's around 600 pages, right? So it's an encyclopedia of esoteric ideas. Now, the purpose, the function of a book like this, at least in its time, was to offer people an introduction into these worlds. In Manly P. Hall's time, there wasn't YouTube, right? There wasn't social media as big as it is now, right? So currently, social media or YouTube serves the purpose of introducing these kinds of ideas. But in his time, you needed a work like this to serve as an encyclopedia to go in and investigate all these esoteric ideas. And the idea, at least from my perspective, at least my interpretation, is that it's to go in and try to find your story, try to find your narrative, try to find your myth, as is popularly known in Jungian circles, finding your myth. So, and you start off with the title, right? So maybe you find the Atlantis mystery is interesting, so maybe you start with that, or some Egyptian stuff, like the Egyptian mysteries are really, really interesting and really intriguing. The zodiac, the symbolism of the sun. So, an encyclopedia like this presented to the masses is so that everyone has a different entry point, so that everybody finds the theme that calls them. So maybe it's something Egyptian or something Eastern. The one thing that is not included in this work is Buddhism. He didn't write anything on Buddhism in this work. However, he did write about Buddhism in other works. He was a prolific writer, writing in all kinds of topics. So, and that's why he was very, very entertaining. And it's unfortunately that we don't have people like that anymore, right? We have some like intellectuals, but they're kind of like dry and boring. Their writings is incredible. Their books are incredible, but they're not really great storytellers. We have podcasts nowadays, but I think people need to, increase their storytelling ability. So that means, I should lead by example. So now there's also ideas here of Freemason, and Manly P. Hall was a Freemason, a 32nd or 33rd degree Freemason, or he was an honorary 33 degree Mason. So it's a very fascinating book. So the idea here is for you to find your calling, right? There's a calling for everybody, and the calling is the calling to this mythical world, to this spiritual world that we feel that is far off in the distance, but is actually right in front of us, right? We can sense it, but not with our ordinary five senses, but with our extraordinary senses, with our intuition. And that's what causes, when we look at art, when we listen to music, when we read poetry, that is what it is pointing to. It is pointing to something that we look for out here. So we think it's the physical thing. So if there's an artist that you love, you project it on that artist. You see that artist as a god. But no, they're just transmitting this light, this sunlight, this ray of light from another world. So they are essentially serving the purpose of pointing to the moon, right? But those who are uninitiated, they think that it is that person, right? They conceptualize it. They conceptualize it within that figure, right? And that's something that an initiate will understand. That it is what is behind the words, behind the stories, behind the symbols. So behind the symbols of the sun, behind the symbols of the pyramid. So the great pyramids in Egypt, there are these structures that are pointing. So they're pointing to the moon, right? And they're there to remind us that there is something more that we have forgotten. And works like this serve the purpose of, finding an entry point. So the idea is to find an entry point into these mysteries. So now, once you find your story, your myth, you want to focus it in on that particular style, on that particular genre. So maybe you find the Egyptian mysteries interesting. So you want to go and find a book that is exclusively on that mystery. So if you follow, let's say, Manly P. Hall, the next logical thing to do is like, well, let me go in and find Manly P. Hall's writings on Egyptian ideas, right? Since it is his way of telling the story that it is that we find interesting. There are Egyptologists, there are Egyptian scholars who are, who have PhDs on these ideas. Manly P. Hall, he didn't have a PhD on any one particular tradition. He studied various different traditions. So he has one view, one perspective of let's say, Egyptian mythology. So ideally, what you want to do is go straight to the scholarly works within that field. But one thing about us, especially within a culture, is we like people who tell the stories in a way that we find interesting and intriguing, and that is the skill that Manly P. Hall had, is in telling these stories. So the next thing would be to, and everything works in seasons. There's a season for everything, and eventually you outgrow a particular genre or a particular author, and then you may, go into more deeper philosophical treatises, right? So at my current level, I engage the sort of the really heavyweight scholars, right? After a decade or probably more of being seriously dedicated to these kinds of ideas, I find myself looking towards the scholarly works of those who have been studying just one particular field for 20 or 30 or 40 years. But Manly P. Hall is a good introductory. He provides a good introductory narrative to these kinds of ideas, or at least the spirit of it, right? So that's now that is my turn to sort of follow the tradition of passing down the fire, of passing down the flame. I turn to his ideas to see how they are presented, so that I could be inspired by, being able to tell those stories in that kind of way. So the call, right? Finding your call. So nowadays, you don't really need, a book like this is not really necessary. You can just walk into like a New Age bookstore. For example, here in New York, you have, I think one is called Namaste, and that seems to be a bit more New Agey store, and you can just go in there and you can just look at the sections, and there's witchcraft, there's Eastern, there's Buddhism, all kinds of works, all kinds of crystals, and so it's a matter of finding your myth, your mythology, right? Your story, and this is just like a short summary of that experience. So ideally, what you want to do is go into a New Age store, Namaste, as a prime example here in New York, and seeing which book calls you, right? Or which genre or which field, maybe some Jungian depth psychology, right? And then you follow that thread, and that this is what is known as the call. Joseph Campbell, an American mythologist, he kind of like presented the standard way of teaching these ideas, which is of the hero's journey. And the first step of the hero's journey is the call. It's being called to adventure. And in order to be called to an adventure, you have to, entertain these ideas that sound mythical, that sound adventurous. And the reason that they speak to us is because they are us in the future, right? So moving on to the next step. So let's say you find your myth. So let's say you, in this particular book, let's say the tarot, right? He only writes one chapter on the tarot. He only writes like 15 pages on the tarot, which is just a general description of the tarot cards. So you may say, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. What you want to do is find a 600-page book just on that topic. All right, so this is 600 pages, as you can see, on general topics all across the board. What you want to do is find, so let's say, for example, you find the tarot interesting. So what you want to do is find go into that genre, right? Go into the genre, and then find the 600-page treatises just on that. And I just happen to have one of them, and that is Meditations on the Tarot, right? Which is 600 pages just on the tarot. And now you're focusing in on a particular tradition that is designed to not just introduce it to you, but to initiate you into it. And this is an initiation text. And this is one of the primary texts that I am working with here at the Lunar Academy, my initiation project. I am, I keep saying this, but eventually I'm going to have to do it. I will present a course just on this, which is basically just me commenting on this book. This is 600 pages covering 22 cards. And what I want to do, what I have as an idea, is to just cover the first chapter, right, in detail, right? A lot of people who sort of give these tarot presentations, they spend like an hour on each chapter, introducing each chapter. But rather than me trying to go through or cover a lot of material, right, which I don't think is practical. There is this one tarotist, she teaches the tarot, and she has, I bought one of her seminars, and it's a 90-minute seminar on the tarot, but man, she just runs through all the cards. Like, she just speeds right through them. I'm like, well, that's too much information, right? Especially for, the people who are new to this kind of stuff. It's too much. So, and then there's others who dedicate an hour on each chapter. So, okay, that's a bit more reasonable, dedicating 1 hour on each card. But what I want to do is dedicate 6 hours just on one card. Because the idea is to get the individual to engage the work, to engage the path. So I feel that if I'm able to set down the foundations of the first tarot card in Meditations on the Tarot, a treatise on tarot philosophy and psychology and mysticism, that if that is your calling, then you buy the book and you study it. Now, you're not going to be able to carry this book to the beach, right? But you can buy it in Kindle form and study it. Now, there's other writers within the Hermetic tradition in which this book is written in. So this is a mystical Christian interpretation of the tarot, right? So it is a Christian work, hence the subtitle, A Journey into Christian Mysticism. All right. So now back to Manly P. Hall. So that's how it works, right? You go out looking, seek and you shall find, and here's an encyclopedia of all kinds of esoteric ideas, and you try to find the one that suits you the best. Now, let's say, for example, that it's the tarot tradition. So, wow, this tarot, you know, business seems really interesting. Let me see what that's about. That will lead you into another 600-page treatise just on the tarot, right? And now you are on a path, right? And that's the idea, is to get somebody on a path towards initiation, towards illumination, what I called lunar initiate. So in my school, the term that I use is lunar initiation, right? That's the purpose of the Lunar Academy, is to cultivate and develop lunar initiates. You know, people who are tuned in, who have realized that there's another world, that there's a higher world, and that, you know, they are to interact in this world from that higher perspective. Hence the term magic. And that's another term that I use, is sacred magic. So I think I've covered quite a lot here. And so in summary, works like The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall serve the purpose of introducing a general audience to a wide spectrum of philosophical, esoteric ideas from all around the world, with the intent for each person that engages a work like that to find their myth, to find their story, and that leads them deeper into whatever tradition it is that they find interesting. That could be astrology, it could be Buddhism, it could be the Greek mysteries, it could be Christian mysticism. You know, whatever it is that calls you, you know, it calls you, right? So it's not something that is intrusive. It's inviting, right? It invites you. So that's what you got to look for, is what is inviting you. You know, which myth, which story. Maybe Carl Jung, although he doesn't cover Carl Jung, but he's definitely another one that is really popular within the esoteric culture, right? So we have to look for what it is inviting, and then, you know, accept the invitation, and then go deeper into that and enter that path. And that is, you know, that is the mystique of a work like The Secret Teachings of All Ages, that it has that mystical aspect where there is a story, there is a narrative for everybody. Everybody has a myth, and what you have to do is find the myth that is compatible and suitable with your life, with your way of life. So this concludes my first attempt at a seminar, and there will be more in the future. So hopefully this seminar is of some benefit, and for anyone who happens to hear it. So good luck on your magical journey.